we're finally here, and House of the Dragon is back. I want to start off by saying a son for a son. And for season premiere, there's a lot of death that happened this episode. But before we start, let's give a quick rundown of just how we got to where we got to. Because this episode starts off with grief. This episode begins and we're reminded of the finale of the first season. Lucerys Velaryon killed by Vhagar. That sets Rhaenyra spiraling, and the events that starts off this season, even the opening sequence is different, because this year's opening sequence this season is Fire and Blood. That's a precursor to this entire season. Even in the intro scroll, we see the history of Westeros, we see the history of House Targaryen, and that starts off with Fire and Blood. This entire season is going to be about one thing and one thing only, and that is vengeance. The throne is one thing, but they crossed the line. Both sides actually crossed the line. We open up with House Stark, everyone's favorite house, House Stark, and we're introduced to Torrhen Stark. And you know what's funny? While throughout all of Westerosi history, two things have been going on. The South have been fighting for the throne, and the North, the Starks, have been always focused on the wall. Even now, Rhaenyra needs support. She needs someone to help. She needs the North's support. And the Starks are worried about what's beyond the wall. We do learn a lot of lore here. We know one thing. When the Targaryens conquered Westeros, apparently the dragons could not fly north. Talk about revelation. The mysticism, the power, the energy of the wall, the dragons can't. That's just a precursor to the Night King coming. The magic of the wall is alive and well. So even though through history, the Targaryens are always focused on the crown, the Starks are always looking north. And I like the fact that we're reminded of the duty of the Night's Watch and the respect that the Night Watch has been given this season. They were honorable. Starks actually went north because it was their duty. Now we know in Game of Thrones, the Night's Watch is filled of, let's just say, deplorable characters. Those guys were just the byproducts of Aryan rule and just what ends up happening. But it's at this moment, we get a nice bonding relationship between a precursor again. Because this show is a prequel, all these things are setting forth the bond between House Targaryen and House Stark. And we know inevitably that becomes Jon Snow. And the fact that both these characters, both Jacaerys Velaryon and Torrhen Stark kind of look like Jon Snow is an Easter egg to future generations of Game of Thrones. But that's when it really turns somber, because it's while he's peace treating with the Starks, it's while Jace is actually talking and trying to get the Starks on their side that he receives news about his brother. And that's when the episode really begins. That's when the somber tone hits, because this was ultimately, this all happened, it was Jace's idea. It was his idea for him and his brother to fly off on their dragons and reach out to their allies in the name of Rhaenyra. So ultimately, Jace feels some sort of guilt because of this, because he tried to step up, tried to be a man, tried to become the king, the heir, and his first actual suggestion landed his brother's death. Come on, you can't make this up. When it comes to Game of Thrones, the irony, you just can't make it up. But now we're gonna get into the real interesting part, because the key major character this season, or this episode per se, the key character who really sets the war going is Daemon. Daemon is not about any of this. The fact that they're not attacking King's Landing already is not just rubbing Daemon the wrong way, it's also rubbing me the wrong way, because Daemon wants him and Rhaenys to take their two dragons and go jump Vhagar. Vhagar is the biggest dragon in the realm. Vhagar is King Kong, Godzilla. You can't stop it. But Meleys and Caraxes together can jump Vhagar, and that's a brilliant plan. If we can't beat Vhagar, the biggest dragon in the land, we have the two second oldest dragons here. 2v1, I like the odds of that, especially the way Caraxes has that long neck, able to intertwine between Vhagar. Having that happen actually is a sound plan. And when we see Daemon, him and Rhaenys share an interesting conversation, because ultimately we know the queen that never was, aka Rhaenys Targaryen, she feels a way about not just Daemon but also Viserys, because that side of the family did usurp the throne. Like, Rhaenys, they forget, just because she's helping y'all out, just because she doesn't like the other side like she likes you guys, or she dislikes them more than she dislikes you guys doesn't mean that she actually is on their side. So when Daemon tries to command her, she reminds him, you're not king. And that's when we find out Rhaenyra's grieving, and she's been gone this entire time. They're in Dragonstone. No one has seen her because she needs closure. She sent off her son. I think Jace was about 12 or 13. She sent off her 13-year-old son, and he's dead. Let's take a moment and look back at Rhaenyra's situation here. Rhaenyra is going through it. She's getting dragged through the mud, and that's because she had the most to lose since the beginning. Rhaenyra's father died. Before she even got to grieve her father, she had a miscarriage. That's 2 strikes right there. And then come to find out that her younger brother, her former best friend, usurped her throne from her. That's 3. And then they killed her son. And she has to deal with all that in the matter of, 2-3 days? And she's supposed to assume the throne. Let's not forget, she's dealing with so much right now, but she needs that closure. She needs to see the body of her son. She needs to understand what is happening to Luke. So she's out there flying, and Daemon is war hungry. Daemon has been wanting to kill that side of the family since the jump. So when he's speaking to Rhaenys and he's telling her, yo, we can do this. But ultimately, Daemon's ultimate flaw, the thing that drives him, the thing that really makes Daemon so angry at the end of the day, is the fact that Daemon, he's not the heir. And by virtue of him not being the heir, you're not king. We don't follow your rule of law. So we have to wait till Rhaenyra actually commands us to do so. 3 grueling days that she had to endure all that pain. But Daemon knows you have to move fast. You have to move swift. But ultimately, he's powerless. Since the very first episode of the very first season, everything Daemon's wanted, he can't get. So he has to go through other means. And we're going to get to the ending. Because a son for a son, that is some cold shit. But that was some necessary thing. That itself was necessary to not just progress the story along, but ultimately, if you're going to be king, if you're going to be queen, you have to respond in kind. That's where Daemon is with everything. And on top of watching that, we're introduced to the other characters. We're starting to see where everybody is. And not just that, they're setting forward the rest of the season. Because next we move to Corlys Velaryon, who we all know from, if you guys have watched any of my videos, if you haven't, go check them out from season 1. My favorite character in the entire season 1 was Corlys Velaryon and his rise to power. Corlys was by far my favorite character in the entirety of the show. Even with the race swapping, all that, the character itself, his characterization adds to it. And when we find him and we see that he's still damaged, he's still going through the physical torments that he went through last season, they did drop us a little Easter egg. I do want to take some time. Corlys Velaryon's lineage is being set up in this season. We see him when he meets this young boy, Alan, who suspiciously enough looks like him. He's bald, no white hair, but that is the show giving us a wink wink. Because not only are we introduced to Aelin Velaryon, when we're introduced to this character, we see him handing Corlys the sword of his heir. And I'm looking at the show like, I see what you did there. That's his heir. That they're laying the foundations to how House Velaryon continues on, because we know fire and blood. And we see through the opening sequence, a majority of the dragons are going to die. This entire squabble is called the Dance of the Dragons. And because of that, that's the reason why ultimately, when we get to Game of Thrones, when we get to Daenerys' timeline, there is no dragons. We go from abundance of dragons to none at all. And that's because of this civil war. So you see how the show is also laying the groundworks for future seasons and how their lineages is continuing. And they're doing it subtly. It's me watching the show and I'm realizing, why is he bald? Because last time we saw Corlys' son, we know Laenor is not dead. But we know when Laenor faked his death and left to go live his own life, to live his free life. Happy Pride Month, Laenor. But the fact that Laenor escaped out and he went to go live his life free of it all, the first thing he did was cut his white hair so that his Targaryen ancestry doesn't show up. And now we're introduced to another black kid with bald hair, and he has an affinity for Corlys, while Corlys has no living heir. We can kind of put 2 and 2 together. So you see how it's kind of laying the groundworks for future seasons. So it's there. We see where Corlys is. Moving on from Corlys, we make our way to King's Landing, and they are on edge. Vhagar comes flying in, and the entirety of King's Landing is going crazy because they see a dragon. Everyone knows If you know Daemon is coming and he's coming in strong. So every time they see a dragon, they're paranoid. Is it Daemon or not? They have to be on edge. I would be on edge. You would be on edge. Because realistically, while they do have Vhagar and they have Aemon as Vhagar's rider, they have Aegon and his dragon. They also have Helaena and her dragon. But as we saw through the rest of the episode, Helaena is useless. Useless to anybody. She's going to serve no purpose. So for all intents and purposes, they have two dragons. Albeit two big dragons, Rhaenyra has more. Because if Rhaenyra comes through, she's Rhaenyra and her dragon, Daemon and his dragon. You have Jace and his dragon. Luke is dead. You also have Rhaenys and her dragon. Then you have Baela, Daemon's daughter, and his dragons. That's 5 we have right now. And the little sister, where's her name? They didn't even mention her name this episode. But that's 6 dragon riders versus 2. 3 if you count Helaena, but Helaena can't really do anything. And if you take, of those 6, you can take 3 or 4 and fight Vhagar. And then the rest of them finish Aegon off. So realistically, if Rhaenyra wanted to, if they followed Daemon's plan, all you have to do is fly to King's Landing, land there, and do what needs to be done. We don't know if that's going to happen because Rhaenyra doesn't want that sort of bloodshed. Rhaenyra doesn't want to go there, land there, and do what she needs to do. King's Landing, they don't know that. So they have to be on edge. And at the same time, they're showing a face of bravado because the hubris of it all. Alicent and Criston Cole. Where do I begin? He's a hypocrite. That's where we're going to start. Criston is a hypocrite beyond belief. The very notion, the very reason why Alicent and Criston have beef is for the very same thing that they're doing now. He's self-righteous. So is Alicent. I had an ounce of pity for her. I felt genuine sorrow for her friendship with Rhaenyra at one point. But the degradation of what she's been doing, the hypocrisy of her and Criston, the fact that they're sitting there fucking when the first reason why they were beefing in the first place with Rhaenyra is because of his relationship with the queen. He felt like she forced him to destroy his own honor. And yet here he is again having relations with what? The new queen. Let that sink in. For people who are Team Green, because we know this season split into 2 teams, Team Green and Team Black. Team Black is Team Rhaenyra, and Team Green is the Hightowers, Alicent, Aegon, and all of them. For those who are Team Green, who stood on the self-righteousness of Alicent and Criston Cole, seeing them commit adultery, seeing him break his oath yet again, seeing her husband not even cold from death yet, getting her box 8 out, and this is why they're against Rhaenyra. Remember that. Rhaenyra can't be queen. They challenged her chastity. They challenged her honor. They didn't want the kingdom ran by a whore, so to speak, and yet here we are. But then it goes further than that because it's not just Criston Cole besmirching the throne. Aegon is king. What does he know about being king? Nothing. If Aegon was allowed to rule the way he was supposed to, he's an idiot. He would have lost this war already. He would have took his dragon. He would have went to fight Daemon and they would have got smashed. Again, 6 dragons versus 2. He would have got smashed. But of course, Otto Hightower, the snake that he is still here guiding him. And Otto is hand to another king. And no one looks around and says, hey, why are the Hightowers in this position? So Aegon, we see the relationship with him and his sister Helaena. We see that it's kind of rift. Aegon doesn't care. We know what type of guy Aegon is. He drinks, he fucks, and that's it. Really, he doesn't have anything else. And we see that ultimately the war, there's no turning back. I mean, the moment they killed Lucerys, they should have known there was no turning back. But with Aegon as king and the way he's moving around the small council and the way he's flaunting his power, there's no way they don't go to war now. He knows it's inevitable. He knows that it's inevitable. He wants to get it over with. But again, Aegon's an idiot. So he's going to listen to his mom. He's going to listen to his grandfather. But while they're deliberating and while they're thinking about their next move, Rhaenyra finds what she's looking for. And after days of searching, she finds the remains of her son. And there's not much left. There's only a dragon wing. Because we saw when Vhagar ate them, Vhagar ate them. But Rhaenyra needed that closure. She had that closure. She came back to Dragonstone. The very first words that she spoke to anybody was, I want Aemon Targaryen. While he is her brother, he also killed her son. Before any, Before war plans, before anything, Daemon realizes this is his end. Because we know Daemon has been wanting to go to war. Aemon has been wanting to go to war. Rhaenyra wants his head. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So now, Daemon has been given the permission to do what he needs to do. So he reunites with the White Worm. Otto used her, and she has some good lines because ultimately, we know it's people like her that get the show moving. These are the characters that do the dirty work. These royals, in this time period, they have dragons. Back in Daenerys' time, they have gold, but ultimately, they don't really get their hands dirty. It's people like the White Worm, these foreigners who come and try to build a name for themselves that ultimately set the plot of motion, that ultimately do the things that these royals have no idea how to do. So when Daemon approaches her with a proposition, your freedom, because you are a traitor, let's not forget, a lot of these characters that we may like in this show, a lot of them deserve death because they're treasonous, but Daemon brings up the proposition. Hey, do you know how we can get in the castle and we'll give you your freedom? Yep, she knows how. And the moment Rhaenyra said that she wanted Aemon Targaryen, we saw Daemon smirk. We saw he had the outs. He's been wanting this. He's been begging Rhaenys to help him fight. Daemon has been helping and plotting and waiting for this moment. The war has to begin. Daemon always knew this was the route. He never had any love for the Hightowers. He never wanted to support them. He hated the fact that Viserys even brought them into the fold. So the fact that he finally has the blessing of the queen, the king, the ruler, the protector of the realm to go after the Hightowers, now it's time to go after the Hightowers. And the plan that Daemon had, I was not expecting that. A son for a son was always a necessity. We live in times where might is right, the biggest dragon wins, and we need retribution. That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Rhaenyra gave the okay, the White Worm gave the location, and now the plan is in motion. If we thought the war had begun, it really didn't start yet. Because right now, what has happened? Rhaenyra is still grieving, and she ultimately holds the key before civil war starts. And she showed restraint. That's what makes Rhaenyra honorable. She showed restraint. She didn't want to immediately attack them, but what they do? They kept pushing. Daemon in one ear, the Hightowers in another ear, not really whispering anything, but pushing against her, testing her patience, usurping her throne, killing her son, setting her off, having her spiral. And if we remember Game of Thrones, we will remember that Targaryens are crazy. Daenerys ultimately snapped and burned down King's Landing. Why are they playing with Rhaenyra? Because they don't think she's gonna do it? How much time can you push somebody before they act? How many times can you push a Targaryen before it's fire and blood? Remember the opening sequence? Fire and blood is going to reign through the kingdom. And yet they keep pushing, keep putting their thumb on her. And that's not what makes it worse. What really, really makes it worse is when Rhaenyra finally sees Jace, her firstborn son. Luke is dead. Her heir standing right before her, trying to give an account of his mission, trying to be the dutiful son that he is. I mean, the fact that he's a bastard, he knows it, but he doesn't let it deter him from doing what he needs to do, his duties. He breaks down, and I think that's the moment that Rhaenyra realizes that there's no going back. I have one son, well, two sons, because she still has the younger one, but I have one heir. The Hightowers are not playing. This is not a game. Cersei Lannister told us in the very first season of Game of Thrones, you play the Game of Thrones, you either win or you die. And now we're here. The first movement, your son is dead. Your father's dead. So far, Rhaenyra is the only one that has been taking L's since the Hightower started moving in on her crown. Since the age of 13, Rhaenyra was the one that was destined to rule. She was raised, her whole life was built upon this. Alicent knew this, Otto knew this, Daemon knew this. Anyone who knows Rhaenyra knows that her only sole purpose, the only thing that she was bred and raised for, was to ultimately become queen. But not only are you stealing her birthright, you're stealing the lives of her children, you're destroying her family, you're besmirching her name. Granted, Rhaenyra has a lot to do with the besmirchment of her name, Because while I'm Team Black, we have to also acknowledge that a lot of this, Rhaenyra kind of could have handled the situation better. Because Rhaenyra could have had at least one child with Laenor to legitimize her claim instead of having 3 bastards. But she didn't. But that does not negate the fact that she's the rightful heir. Now she has to look at her son. They have to bury her father and 2 kids. That's what Rhaenyra had to bury. That's what she has to deal with right now. And watching her say goodbye to her son, watching Jace say goodbye to his brother, lifting up his younger brother, who because of the age gap that they now have, they'll never be as close as Jace was with Luke. The fact that Jace suggested Luke be the one that fly to Storm's End, that's eating him alive. And we know he already doesn't have a problem fighting Aemond. He already tries to prove himself. He already has the fact that he knows he's a bastard. He tries to overcompensate, so we know he's not gonna take this lying down. And then we see Daemon's younger daughter, Rhaena Targaryen. Just so we're clear, Rhaenys is the grandmother, Rhaenyra is Rhaenyra, and Rhaena is Daemon's daughter, who was also betrothed to Luke. So her fiance got eaten by the dragon. That's why she was breaking down. Her fiance got eaten by their cousin, who they never liked as children. Because remember, they took out his eye. Aemon was a dick, but he was still a kid, so he has reason to be angry. Like, I'm not gonna completely be biased towards Team Black and act like Team Green doesn't have some legitimate gripes. Granted, did they take it too far? Yes. But you take my eye, I mean, everything's on the table, but Daemon's already making his move. And what we forget, or what the Hightowers forget, a lot of people forget that Daemon was the one who gave them the gold cloaks. He made them what they are today. Because of that, they miss Daemon. They love Daemon. That's why they have a loyalty to him. So when Daemon shows up to King's Landing, I'm like, oh shit, he's gonna sneak in there and handle business. Because if one thing Daemon's about that action. So us seeing him land in King's Landing, I thought he was gonna be the one that goes through with it. But he hires a gold cloak and a rat catcher. And remember what I said when I was talking about the White Worm, how it's always the small folk, how it's always the downtrodden that does the dirty work? Blood and cheese. Daemon hires them, he sends them to the castle, and he wants one thing, Aemon Targaryen. And they ask Daemon, what if we can't find Aemon? What do we do then? And it fades to black. You know why it fades to black? Because Daemon is all about the ambiguity. I am willing to bet whatever I have to bet that Daemon actually told them, hey, if you can't find Aemon, kill one of the heirs. They are his nephews and cousins and in-laws. They're his family, but Daemon has no love for that side. In Daemon's eyes, they should have never existed. Had Viserys did what he needed to do, they would have never existed. So Daemon doesn't care who dies as long as they get off his throne, give Rhaenyra a throne, and ultimately Daemon gets to be king like he's always wanted. So if he has to kill his nephews, if he has to kill his grandnephews, if he has to kill his sister-in-law, he doesn't care. He's loyal to one thing, and that's Rhaenyra in his own way, because Daemon still has a lot of like weird kind of dynamic power struggles. We can get into that in another video. Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship is super complex, but I'm willing to bet anything that I have that Daemon was behind. Daemon told them, hey, if you guys can't find Aemon, kill Aegon's heir. Because why would 2 commoners, 2 bottom dwellers, 2 small folk choose to kill the heir unless they were given strict commands, because they would not leave without their head. But before we get into that, Aemon is plotting to attack first. Those 2 guys, Aemon and Daemon, I feel like are on a crash course for each other. They're on a crash course for one another, and nothing's gonna stop that collision from happening. So when we see him and Criston Cole plotting, that's why he's not in his room when they get there. Because Daemon is proactive, Aemon is also proactive. So the only reactive character that was in this episode was Helaena and her kids. That's why when Blood and Cheese got there, they could not find Aemon, but they went after her. And they're loyal killers, if we're honest, because they could have easily just killed Helaena and the 2 kids if they were given the order. But because Daemon gave them the order of a son for a son, they went after the son, and she gave the son up. If we thought Helaena was crazy before, this takes the cake. And the funny part is, she also kind of gave a premonition on what would be happening. Because remember, when Aegon went to see her earlier in the episode, Aegon was talking to her and she said she's afraid. And he's like, don't be afraid. We have the biggest dragons. There's nothing to fear. She's not afraid of the dragons. She's afraid of the rats. And that would ultimately come to fruition that it's the rat catchers. It's the rats that led to the death of her son. But she was onto something. So when that happens, she saw this happening and she just gave the heir up. She pointed him out. Hey, that's the heir right there. They believed her and they killed. She didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She could have yelled at the top of her lungs and the guards would have been there. Or would they have? Because the way the episode ends, and we're sitting there, we're looking at Alicent and Criston Cole. She told him in the beginning of the episode, hey, this is the last time. We can't do this anymore. But yet, at the very end of the episode, she's fucking him again. Not only is she fucking him, the fact that Helena walks in, and it's like, so even if she screamed for help, even if Helena had asked for help, the King's Guard could not help. The leader of the King's Guard was busy fucking the Queen. Again, breaking his vows. But yet, we saw when he was talking to Aemon, the worst part about Criston Cole, which I want to get back to his character. The worst part of this man is his hypocrisy. Even after sleeping with the Queen, when he's discussing this with Aemon and they're talking about Rhaenyra, he talks about her vileness and how she's poison and how she's unpure. Yet, here he is fucking the Queen when his duty is to the heir of the Iron Throne. If he was doing his job, he would have been there protecting Jaehaerys, and Blood and Cheese would have never had a son for a son. If Alicent was as pure as she portrayed, we saw her praying in the episode. We saw her showing that she has some sort of faith, some sort of religion, some sort of spirituality to her, but it's a lie. From this moment here, they've been feeling each other. So both of them doing what they're not supposed to be doing, both of them who are fighting against Rhaenyra for the very things that they're doing, because they're busy breaking their vows, fucking in the King's Palace, he couldn't do his job and protect the heir to the Iron Throne. Granted, they're usurpers, but from their perspective, Jaehaerys is the heir to Aegon. Instead of doing his job, he was actually doing his mom. And realistically, that's how the episode ends. With Helena walking into her mom, sleeping with her sworn protector, her kid dead, Daemon is gonna get the head, and now we're gonna find ourselves with a whole bunch of things to look forward to for the rest of the season. There's going to be a lot that's at play here. This first episode laid the groundworks for a lot of things to come later in the season, because now we have established a relationship between Alicent and Criston Cole. We know Criston doesn't give a fuck, because ultimately he's going to be sad about it. He's going to act like it pains him, but he's not going to leave her alone. He's tasted queen. He's a commoner who rose through the ranks and now he's sleeping with a queen. He's tasted that, and now that there's another one, he's tasted. I wouldn't be surprised if later on in life he tries to make a pass at Helena at this point, because we know that's his MO. So we see that relationship with Alicent. He doesn't care about Alicent's guilt. If she has any semblance of humanity left in her, it's gonna eat her alive. That this was what she was doing instead of taking care of her daughter, her grandson. This is gonna eat her alive. That's one thing happening there. They got in there through Aemon's room. Aemon is gonna know someone was in his room, because remember, they're small folk. So Blood and Cheese got there, and the first thing Blood did was take all the coins off the table, because these guys are playing checkers with gold coins. So Aemon's gonna realize, hey, they got in through my room. They were after me. He didn't let the eye go. He didn't lose his life, but he never let that go. So if he's willing to die about an eyeball, could you imagine what he's willing to do when y'all tried to kill me? That's another aspect of the show that's going to be interesting. That's two dynamics there. Aegon loves his son. We saw when he invited his son to the small council meeting, he lets his son do whatever he wants. That's his heir. That's his pride and joy. Aegon actually cares about something more than himself. And y'all killed him? What do you think he's gonna do? He already wants to take his dragon and take his brother's dragon and burn the blockade. Now you killed my heir? He doesn't care if it's in retribution. Aegon is named after Aegon the Conqueror. When Aegon the Conqueror wanted Westeros, what did he do? He jumped on his dragon, he flew to Westeros, and he burned shit to the ground. Blood and fire brings us back to the theme of the show. The intro theme, the new opening, is a tapestry of blood and fire. We see dragons, we see castles, we see blood and fire. Aegon is Targaryen. He has dragons. They can snap like this. The dance of the dragons really has begun. The Green have felt the sting of a counterattack, And even though they started it, even though they killed Lucerys, even though they usurped the throne, they still feel slighted, so they're gonna want to get up. On the flip side, we're looking at Rhaenyra's side. Daemon acted on his own yet again. Rhaenyra did not order him to do that. Rhaenyra ordered him to give me Aemond. And like I said, I'm willing to bet whatever I have that he said, if you guys can't find Aemond, or fuck finding Aemond, I know Daemon. Daemon told him, hey, if he's in his room, off him. If he's not there, kill the heir. So he's gonna have to answer for his crimes. And one thing we know about Daemon, since the first season, he loves committing war crimes. He loves fighting dirty. This is what he lives for. He is their best warrior. He knows this. His dragon is more battle experienced. Well, Vhagar was there when the Targaryens initiated. That's why the Greens are so cocky. It's the fact that they had one of the dragons from the original conquest. Vhagar is big for a reason. Vhagar is a big bitch. Vhagar is old and powerful. That's why they're cocky. But Daemon thinks he can take her. And Daemon has fought on dragons. Daemon has been to war. He's won the Stepstones. He's flown around the world with Vhagar. Remember, let's not forget, Laena Velaryon used to have Vhagar. Laena was married to Daemon. They flew around the world on their dragons. Daemon knows how to kill Vhagar. But Rhaenyra didn't send him. He's gonna have to answer for that. That's one. Two, I'm not done with Corlys. Alan, mark my words, is Corlys' son. My theory is solely based on the fact that he's black and bald. But if you know anything about TV and foreshadowing, you'll know, especially like I said, with the way that Laenor exited the show, black and bald, that's how he lost one son, and now he's getting another son back. And the fact that he handed him the sword of his heir, the sword of House Velaryon, it's there. That is another dragon rider. Number 7 for Rhaenyra. That is another dragon rider. Remember, they have 6 dragon riders. They have like 3 or 4 more dragons without riders in the pits. In Dragonstone, they have dragons without riders in there. And now you're telling me that he has another son, and not just a random son, a capable son who's seafaring, a son who was on missions with him, a son who can clearly fight because he saved his life. Rhaenyra's team is being bolstered, and at the same time, I'm sitting here like, if we have 6 dragons with a potential 7th, they have 3 dragons, really 2 because Helena's crazy out of her mind. Why does it seem like Rhaenyra's team isn't winning? Corlys Velaryon, trained warrior, been in war, sailed around the world. Rhaenys, the queen that never was, dragon riding for over 30 years. Daemon, seasoned warrior, king of the Stepstones, general, fought in 1 wars. On the flip side, you have Aegon, ain't never do shit in his life. Aemond, he can fight, but he's never actually fought in a real war. He's trained and fought like tournaments. And Criston Cole, the same thing. He's never actually really fought in a war himself. So not only do they have less dragons, they have less battle experience, but for some reason, they're winning. Which brings us to the clash, because ever since childhood, Daemon has been manipulating Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra has been fighting his pool, and he just keeps acting on his own. But let's not forget the reason they got married in the first place. Rhaenyra came to Daemon and asked Daemon to help. Told Daemon, I need your help, uncle. But that doesn't give him the license to act the way he does. It's interesting because we have 2 Targaryens, both mad in their own way. Rhaenyra showing restraint, I feel like it is costing them the war, because if they were to fly to King's Landing with their 6 dragons, we have 6 weapons of mass destruction to your 2, fire and blood. Rhaenyra is fighting against her nature, just like Daenerys fought against her nature, and we know she ends up snapping. The way the Targaryens have always kept power was through fire and blood. We know that this show, House of the Dragons, this whole conflict, the Dance of the Dragons, is what starts to cause them to lose their power. Why? Because they're fighting against their nature. Daemon is the one true Targaryen here. Rhaenys fighting against it. Rhaenyra fighting against it. Aegon wants to give into it. Aemond wants to give into it, but Otto Hightower and Alicent Hightower are pulling them in because they're not pure Targaryens. They're half Targaryen and half Hightower. So they're not succumbing to their fire and bloodlust. They're gonna dance. Many of them are gonna die. We know for a fact the dragons go extinct, because we've seen Game of Thrones, there's no dragons. Well, without blood magic and Daenerys, there's no dragons left alive, except for the new ones that were born, because they died, because they didn't give into the nature. We saw how Luke died. Dragons know one thing and one thing only. You respond with fire. When Vhagar was harassing Araxes, she was the smaller dragon. She could have flew away, it retaliated, fired, and Vhagar killed it. Because Targaryens know one thing, and that's fire and blood. They are the blood of the dragons. So you either fight and die, or you lose all power. Look what happened to Viserys. As a king, we literally saw him decompose before our very eyes. Why is that? He did not give in to his nature, his fire and blood. He didn't even bother to claim another dragon after his dragon died when he was young. He was not a dragon. So we're gonna see the House of the Dragon crumble. This is why the show's called the House of the Dragon, of course. The Targaryens are the dragons. We're watching the house crumble before our very eyes. It's interesting though. We see what happens when there's nothing left to conquer. Viserys had nothing left. He decomposed and died. Before Viserys was king, his grandfather Jaehaerys I ruled the Seven Kingdoms for 70 years. And the reason he lasted so long was because he had a kingdom to conquer. In the history of Westeros, Maegor the Cruel, the second, was he the second? No, he's the third king of the third Targaryen king of Westeros, pretty much destroyed our relations with the rest of the kingdom, and Jaehaerys spent 70 years conquering the west of Westeros through reconciliation, through intimidation of dragon, but there was something to be done, and he was doing that. He conquered them, and he lived 70 years, because if you did not bend the knee, you died. When he passed, Viserys became king. Viserys got fat and lazy. Viserys decomposed, and on his decomposition, he died. Now, what's happening now? There's two kings and queens. Aegon is one king, and Rhaenyra is the other queen. They're fighting each other, but we see how Aegon seems more vibrant and jovial because he's ready to fight. Aemon, you know what's funny? Daemon looks younger than everybody else, but he's actually older than everyone else fighting for the throne. Granted, Otto Hightower, he's the hand of three other kings. He's old, but he's never going to sit on the Iron Throne. Rhaenys is never sitting on the Iron Throne. And Corlys, those three are the only people who play major roles in the story that are older than Daemon. They look like they could be Daemon's parents. They're not that much older than him, but they look like they could be his parents. Daemon looks the same age as Alicent, Rhaenyra. He looks like someone in his 30s when he's actually in his 40s pushing 50. But he looks like his late 20s, early 30s, like the rest of them, because he succumbs to his nature of fire and blood. Remember, the Targaryens themselves, Game of Thrones talked about it. House of Dragon has spoken about it. Anyway, they talk about the magic of the blood of the dragon. The Targaryens themselves have magic blood. Because they have magic blood, that allows them to ride the dragons, that allows some of them to be fireproof. That's why Daenerys can walk through fire. They're hot-blooded. They take hot showers. There's magic in their blood. So when they succumb to their nature, remember Daenerys' son was a deformed dragon creature? Daemon's son with Laena was also going to be a deformed dragon creature. That's why she was going to die, and she killed herself. The Targaryens can give birth to weird dragon mixture humanoid creature things. They never make it to term, but the fact that they can actually give birth to these monsters show that the Targaryens themselves are fueled by the same things the dragons are fueled by: fire and blood. That is the funny part. The reason I keep repeating that is House of the Dragons itself is based on the book Fire and Blood. So that is why it's a recurring theme. That is why when it comes to Targaryens, they have to give that. That's why Daemon is the perfect representation of a Targaryen. On one hand, Daemon is vicious, evil, and cruel. On the other hand, he's cunning, nice, and sweet. He's the pure There is no, when it comes to Targaryens, there is no middle ground. You're either full crazy or you ain't. And when you ain't, you're not normal. You're like on the opposite of crazy. You're like too rational. You don't have that dragon in you. But that's their nature. The whole show itself, the whole world itself is called A Song of Ice and Fire. This whole universe is a song of ice and fire. On the flip side of the Targaryens' blood and fire, we have the Starks and Winter is Coming, which is what made Jon Snow such a dynamic character, and which is what makes the Starks themselves dynamic characters. They're the polar opposites when it comes to the Targaryen. They live in the cold. Their creatures don't fly. They have dire wolves. They believe in duty and honor above all else. The Targaryens only talk about duty and honor. When it comes to actually living it, we have dragons. We're not gonna do that. That's their mindset. We ain't doing that because we got dragons. So when we see the conversation between Torrhen Stark and Lucerys Velaryon, Lucerys Targaryen, whatever you want to call him, while he's eager to prove himself, he has Targaryen blood. He's not fully Targaryen, so he doesn't jump on his dragon and fly to King's Landing and get revenge. He's more tamed. Again, the dilution of that. But we see that with the combination of that, we see the groundworks being led for the overarching narrative. The reason why the Starks aren't so gung-ho to join the war, all this shit is irrelevant. Like, the Night King lives beyond the wall. The Endless Night is coming. You guys are squabbling over an Iron Throne. It's easy to say that the Targaryens were the reasons why the White Walkers got here in the first place. With the wall being where it is, and having Rhaenyra has 6 and the High Towers have 3. That's 9 active dragons. If the Targaryens found unity and continued working together, by the time the White Walkers came through in Game of Thrones, you take those 9 dragons, they would have had an armada of dragons ready to fight the Long Night. They would have had an army ready to fight the White Walkers beyond the wall. But the Targaryens destroyed it. And remember, we're talking about the magic of their blood. The dragons themselves could not fly beyond the wall. But in Game of Thrones, Daenerys jumped on the back of her dragon and she flew north beyond the wall. That just goes to show that the magic that was there weakened. Magic was dying because the family with all the magical blood running through their veins are killing each other because of the High Towers. It's nuts. But guys, if you're new here, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button. We will be live streaming every episode, post every episode every Sunday. And I'll see y'all on the next live stream. Peace.